Welcome back to Tipping Point. I'm your host, Kara McKinney. In a delicious bit of man bites dog irony, the Los Angeles Times recently published a piece headlined, "Californians and other Americans are flooding Mexico City. Some locals want them to go home." The story opens with a local sitting with friends in a cafe when he makes a startling realization, quote, "We're the only brown people. We're the only people speaking Spanish except the waiters." Seems since a gushing 2016 New York Times travel article, but especially since the COVID-19 shutdowns of 2020, hordes of mostly white American workers have brought their remote work jobs to the capital of Mexico, where it's cheaper to live. And while restaurateurs, real estate agents, and Airbnb hosts are psyched about the influx of big spending yuppies, not everyone is. Expletive-laced posters put up in English have been popping up in the city, labeling the remote work gringos, quote, "a plague," and making a simple demand: leave. Many describe the newcomers in terms of neo-imperialism. Others complain about rents going up and whole neighborhoods becoming expat enclaves. And some say that the influx of so many white people is exacerbating an age-old problem in Mexico, an informal caste system which favors light-skinned Mexicans over darker-skinned natives. Of course, it wouldn't be the LA Times if they didn't figure a way to work some black grievance into the piece as well. So to that end, they spoke to tech industry marketing professional Lauren Rodwell, who said, though she is sensitive to gentrification concerns, having witnessed it in San Francisco, that, quote, I kind of feel like, as a person of color from America, I'm so economically disadvantaged that wherever I go and experience some advantage or equity, I take it," end quote. Joining us now to discuss is Saurabh Sharma, the president of AmCanon Moment. Thanks for being here tonight, Saurabh.
It's my pleasure to be here, Kara.
Great. So I'm sorry, but this whole piece is hilarious to me because everything in it is what we get called racist for pointing out about culture or language or other shifts when you have large amounts of people coming in and, of course, are not exactly taking up the customs of the people of where they're living. But do you think that went over the heads of the editors at the Los Angeles Times?
I think it did, because what they're talking about are normal, very human concerns about community that immigration tends to cause problems in. Unfortunately, because of the woke worldview that dominates in America today, you're not allowed to talk about it in the context of American cities, but they're allowed to notice this when it comes to a foreign city. So I think that it's a great survey of a lot of the concerns that you have from mass immigration. And I would just hope that American policymakers take notice, because this may be one of the most candid pieces of journalism to come out in the mainstream press about the consequences of mass immigration in the last 30 years.
And it's also funny, kind of the intersection you see of different liberal types of grievances. What were some of your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the most analogous one is gentrification, which is another example of how liberals do have the ability to think in terms of the integrity of communities, of local values, of some kind of subsidiarity or federalism. Unfortunately, again, the one group of people you're not allowed to be concerned about this for is normal middle-class Americans. I think that there's a whole layer of different concerns that people can have. For instance, the economic consequences of mass immigration, how it tends to distort the waging of local communities. In the case of Mexico City, it's driving those rents up, but there's no commensurate, increase in wages that's happening locally as well. Another one is cultural, when people don't feel like the people they're surrounded with share common culture. Another one is language. It turns out that one of the normal things that people of all races and ethnicities crave is the ability to communicate with their peers. And lastly, it turns out that mass immigration causes consequences because it's deeply destabilizing. A lot of these people are coming to Mexico City because of the work from home rules that corporations instituted over the last 2 or 3 years. And who knows how long those are going to stay. Not only are there deeply distortive, negative consequences happening on this side of the equation for Mexico City, but when maybe some of these people go back to the countries that they came from, there's going to be other consequences as well. So it is a hilarious example of the circumstances under which liberals are allowed to notice common sense public policy concerns with relation to mass immigration that us conservatives have been talking about for a long time. But I really hope in a serious, honest, and sincere way that liberals pay attention to what's happening in a place like Mexico City, because it's happening in every American city. And not only do we have the consequences of, say, high skill immigration, for instance, the very wealthy home buyers coming from places like China, Saudi Arabia, and elsewhere, causing very similar effects on American cities, but we have the added consequence of very low skill migration that causes other problems as well that weren't captured in this piece.
And somehow I think the argument from some of these Americans moving down to Mexico of, well, they just want a better life. I think for many on the left, I think it won't fly. As you can see, they're getting pretty upset about what's going on there, because you hear that all the time here in America. Well, these people are coming here for a better life. But I think that's only one leg of the issue, because, well, if you think about like a restaurant, any kind of franchise, a business, you have the owner and then you have the workers. Well, the workers are there just for the better life, but they don't ultimately care what happens to the store overall, the company overall, because if it goes under, well, they'll just get a job elsewhere that's pays similarly and perhaps ask of them the same kind of work. Whereas if you're the owner of the store, it's going to be a lot more of your blood, sweat, and tears. You really do care about the long-term overall consequences of what happens to your company. And so I think the idea of just, well, it's just about a better life, without the idea of assimilation and wanting to be part of the fabric of which you are moving to. I think that's a big key, and that's something that you and I can agree on with many of these people in Mexico who are concerned by people coming in and they don't necessarily want to assimilate. They just are there for the quote-unquote better life, the cheaper living standards.
Correct. You could tell the same story about the United States. Even so many libertarian minded conservatives in America, they say, well, people are coming here for a better life, but these cultural considerations, what kind of communities we're forming, are we actually creating deeply tied together communities of people that aren't just economic units? Those are things that we struggle with in the United States as well, because we have this neoliberal consensus that says that you're not allowed to care about these kinds of things. But as we can see in this example of Mexico City, it is a very real concern. It's something we need to be very attentive to. Otherwise, we're all just going to be atomized individuals flitting around the world, going wherever our labor price is most appreciated. That's not living. That's not any sense of community or nationhood. It's deeply destabilizing families, and it's ultimately a very unhealthy way to live.
And I really do love the way you tie everything together so perfectly, and I really do hope your message, it goes far and wide, because it's so necessary right now. I saw recently you put out a tweet. I think you were congratulating the Heritage Foundation actually for coming against, I have the tweet up here, coming out against the amnesty provisions in the National Defense Authorization Act. And that's just one of those things to me, you think, the National Defense Authorization Act? How is there anything even remotely close to amnesty in there? But you see, all these big interest groups, they have tentacles. They can put these things into places where you least expect it. Is that something we really need to be paying attention to?
Absolutely. The NDAA is something that's passed with some regularity, and you find that the swamp is always looking for an excuse to put its priorities into that major piece of legislation, because it's one of the few things that has to pass with some regularity. Otherwise, everything comes grinding to a halt. This amnesty provision for so-called documented dreamers, this is a term of art that was invented by a lot of these lefty NGOs to describe people who are the children of people who don't have a green card, who are not citizens of the United States. They're trying to amnesty all of them and give them a path to citizenship. I have no problem with this group of people. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just that we need to have a system of laws in this country that is held to. You can't always amnesty the inconvenient aspects of our immigration system. And secondly, we need to be attentive to the overall numbers of immigrants that we're admitting into the United States every year, because it has these consequences for our labor force, for our environment, for the health of our cities, and for our culture. And so I was gone after by a lot of, it seems like, activists for amnesty on Twitter. I think the term of art is I was ratioed. That's totally okay, because it was really important to praise the Heritage Foundation, which has been going in a more America First direction lately, for taking a strong stand against this amendment to the NDAA. So I'm more than happy to take the slings and arrows. They seem to get particularly angry when I, someone who was an immigrant but naturalized myself, speak out against mass immigration, because they tend to have a much harder time using the only answer they often have to their opponents on this public policy issue, which is calling them racist. They seem to be less able to do that with me. I wonder why, but that's all right. I'm happy to take the attacks.
Well, Saurabh, we really are happy to have you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.